Providing a dose of rationality, critical thinking, and skepticism from a conservative atheist perspective, this is the Bitchspot Report podcast. Every week, your host will bring you news of note and commentary on topics of interest in hopes of sparking intelligent discussion on important issues of the day. It's not pretty, it's probably not safe for work, but we tell it like it is and offer no quarter to the credulous, the gullible, or the downright stupid. It's not for the easily offended or for the religiously or liberally minded, but it is about 90 minutes of secular conservative entertainment. So let's get right to the show. From the desert to the sea and all of internet land, this is the Bitchspot Report podcast. This week, we have a pastor who's willing to be set on fire to oppose gay marriage. Louisiana is allowing the Bible in classrooms to oppose evolution. The war on the Confederate flag has begun and it's about damn time. The U.S. is really stupid when it comes to Israel. Plus, we talk about the controversial French case of people who want to be forgotten by Google. All this and more coming up now. And here we are again. So how are we doing?
Oh, I am doing fine. Surviving. It is hot. Steamy. It is hot. Anyone listening to us from Australia is right now probably saying, oh, I feel so bad for you.
Yeah, well, I don't think that they care anyway.
But it's a dry heat in Australia.
It's a dry heat here too. Actually, it's not that bad, but then again, I've had the air conditioning on and, you know, it doesn't matter.
I have my little air conditioning unit in here. And, we are doing our best right now to stay cool. So, yeah, we have a ton of stuff going on today.
Yeah, it's more craziness than we can throw a stick at. And I've got a lot of sticks.
Or poke a stick at.
Yeah.
It's always good to poke crazy.
Yeah. All right, well, I don't know. Do we have anything to talk about before we go for crazy?
No, let's just start with the crazy.
All right.
And now the news.
These folks send in their activists with their lawyers when they find there's a Christian who's principled and not willing to participate in any kind of sanctioning of same-sex marriage, and they sue them until they go into bankruptcy. In fact, the New Mexico Supreme Court, in ruling on the case there, said that participating in the sanction of same-sex marriage was the, quote, price of citizenship in the United States. So we know what's coming, and we're simply being preemptive and saying, no matter what the cost, we understand and we waive the cost. We are not going to bow, we're not going to bend, and if necessary, we will burn.
Texas pastor Rick Scarborough has said what some have interpreted to mean that he's willing to be burned to death in order to oppose gay marriage. Now, I don't think it's that cut and dried. I think that this is a bit of media extremism, but I wouldn't be too surprised to find some radical Christians willing to throw their lives away to keep the hatred going. And I'm really kind of torn between letting them set themselves alight and refusing to give in to their media whoring ways. Why are these people so stupid?
Well, I mean, first of all, it sounds kind of odd because you're obviously trying to say we're going to go to the wall for this. But, you know, the problem is that he's saying he'll burn himself alive because nobody's going to put you up against the wall for this. Again, as we said, it gets back to the fact that homosexuals, gay, bisexual, lesbian, transgender, they just want the right to do what other people have the right to do. And they have no interest in putting anyone up against the wall. You know, no matter how nice a wall it is, you're not going to be put up. So you've got to say, well, I'm going to put myself up against the wall. Which I suppose is an adult version of I'm going to hold my breath till I turn blue and die and then you'll give me my ice cream cone.
Well, yeah, but so much of this is just bad theater. I mean, if this guy is serious about burning, let's see him douse himself in gasoline and light himself on fire like the Buddhists do. Put up or shut up, dude. I bet this guy doesn't have the balls.
No. Well, I mean, think about how many people said God is going to call me home if we don't get my money, but they very seldom then turn around and say, okay, well, God telephoned me today, so I'm going to shoot myself.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's like last week when I said, you know, Oral Roberts was going to have God send him home if we didn't send him money. Why did we send him money? It's the best way to prove God is real. But hey, if you guys really feel like you want to send somebody something, let's send Scarborough cans of lighter fluid in the mail or boxes of matches. Let's see how serious this guy is.
Yeah, and Again, they're trying to create this, we are being utterly oppressed. The other side isn't cooperating. There is no oppression. So you have to keep on coming up with stunts like this, which also, of course, have a lot to do with getting people to send money. Because those great big churches don't pay for themselves.
Yeah, but these people aren't serious. That's kind of the thing. No. I mean, the guy, when he said whatever he said, I don't feel like going to look up exactly how he said it, but it came off a couple of different ways. I mean, he came off like, well, I'm willing to be lit on fire, but of course nobody's going to light him on fire, so it's an empty threat. And the other way that I kind of was looking at it was, well, we're willing to go to hell over shit like this, or, we're talking about hellfire and that kind of thing. But that's all imaginary too, so it doesn't really matter.
Well, I mean, and more importantly, if you're taking the right stance, you're in no danger of going to hell. So what are you saying? I know what I'm doing is wrong, so I'm so happy to do this wrong thing. I am willing to run the risk of eternal damnation. If you're running the risk of eternal damnation, you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. That's kind of implicit in the Bible. Yeah, I mean, it's a crusade for martyrdom. They want to be martyred.
No, they don't, because if they wanted to be martyred, they'd be out there pouring gasoline on themselves. These guys out there
want the martyr's crown. They don't want the process. They want the martyr's crown. They want everybody to look at them and say, "Oh my God, you're such a brave martyr, standing up to these terrible, evil people who haven't done anything to you, but they haven't done it in a terrible and evil way. And, we're going to cheer you on." And fortunately, it's looking like increasingly when announcements like these get made, I mean, even religious people are just kind of going, yeah, that's, interesting. They're preaching to an increasingly small segment of America.
They're just ridiculous when they're going, oh yeah, I'm willing to get AIDS. I'm willing to do this. I'm willing to do that. No, you're not. You're absolutely not willing to do any of that. You're willing to talk about it. You're willing to flap your lips a bunch, but you're not actually willing to do any of the things that you claim you're willing to do.
No. And like I said, I just hope it's seen as the ridiculous, the ridiculous thing that it really is. I mean, it's just seen as something worthy of nothing other than mockery.
Yeah, well, likewise, there's this couple in Australia who are saying that if gay marriage is legalized, they're going to get a divorce. But the fact is, they've said that they're just going to continue to live together like they're married, which means that in Australia, they can never get a divorce because one of the requirements of getting a divorce in Australia is you have to live apart for at least 12 months ahead of time and have no interest in ever living together again. So they basically can't get a divorce. It's just more lip flapping bullshit.
It's nice to know that crazy isn't only located in America. Sometimes we get a little depressed about our country, and then someone, thank you people in foreign climes for letting us know that you can be just as crazy as we are. It makes us feel good.
Yeah, as long as we're not exporting the crazy there.
I think the Australian wildlife would eat our crazies.
God, we can only hope. Maybe we should import some.
It would work. Yeah, and in all seriousness, this is how it's going to continue. I mean, they're just desperately trying to get people to think how incredible this is, and increasingly you're simply seeing people just responding with a big yawn. And they can't handle that. That bothers them worse probably than actual prosecution would.
Well, they're not going to get prosecuted because they don't actually do anything. They talk a big game, but that's all they can do.
In all seriousness, I'm kind of happy about this. The lack of this is just so utterly funny that it's just funny to see them screaming out into the world and largely a great big yawn in response from everybody.
Yeah, but you would think that these people would actually think, well, if I'm going to make this claim, if I'm going to make this threat, it should actually be somewhat credible. But these are just ridiculous. It's like, I'm going to strap a nuclear bomb to my back. They're just so utterly absurd that anybody with half a clue just looks at him and goes, what the fuck are you talking about, Willis? What in the hell is wrong with you people?
Yeah, but again, we also have talked about how a lot of times these people are, very closed in. They don't talk to other people, or if they talk, they don't listen. So really seriously, in the world they live in, this is a valid and glorious stance. I mean, let's face it, one of the things that has hurt religion in America and all over the world is the fact of the matter is that very few religions ever bothered to actually try to engage with people. They're used to having the social power, some places the legal power, to compel you to do what they want you to.
But it's so utterly stupid, the things that they're saying. I mean, even when they had the legal power to do things and force you to comply with their wishes, were they out there standing around going, yes, you do what I say or a giant fish is gonna fall on my head and flatten me. I mean, that's the kind of crap they're saying today. Is this the way they've always been?
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, you got to remember is that if you're the dominant force in a society, you don't have to make a good argument. If somebody can't get a good job unless they toe the line, which for many years, I mean, let's face it, many years not going to church, not going to the right church, even in parts of America, it was just utterly impossible to really exist in society. You don't have to engage someone on that. You don't have to talk to somebody when they're doing something like that.
Yeah, but if you don't have to engage them, then why are they bothering to make threats in the first place? If you know that they're going to be forced either through social pressure, legal pressure, or whatever to do what you want, why bother even making a threat in the first place? Because these people are not good at it.
No, they're not. But they're not used to this new world. Let's face it. I mean, in terms, when we've talked about the loss of the increasing number of people leaving the church, or churches, in historical terms, that's a very new trend. And so these are people, a lot of these people grew up, became powerful in their church, where, in all seriousness, competing for the hearts and minds of your congregation was not a major issue. I mean, they grew up in a time when the question of gay marriage wouldn't even come up. It was the question of should you be allowed to legally throw a person who's gay in prison. And now they're in a world where not only is that not the factor, but, the idea of gay marriage is gaining increasing ground with just about everybody. Even people who self-identify as religious, a growing number of them are saying, well, why the hell shouldn't we let people get married if they're gay?
Yeah.
So, these individuals just can't handle the changes.
Yeah, and that's funny because, within the last day or two, I had somebody tell me that the majority of people on the planet Earth were Christian. And I'm just going, what, huh? So I went and I looked it up. And, according to a Pew survey, in 2010, only 32.5% of the world population identifies as Christian. And this guy refused to believe it. He was going, no, 80 to 90% of the world is Christian. It's like, dude, you're fucking out of your goddamn mind. You people are just utterly delusional. It's no wonder you're losing this bad.
Yeah, well, I mean, but the problem is that to ask those questions, you suddenly start asking yourself, seriously, why aren't we? What is the world really? I mean, really for a lot of these religious people, the last question they're prepared to ask is to sit down and say, let's look at the world as it is. And I'm not even talking about whether or not their belief in God. I'm just talking about look at the world as it is socially, economically, politically. I mean, many of these people behave as if the United States and their religions are under continuous, desperate threats. When in reality, it's about as far from that as you can get. But they want, I think, to remain, they love the sense of persecution. They want to exist in a world where you're forever in danger of being persecuted. Because then obviously you're the hero in your own head.
Well, of course. But I mean, I was even pointing out to this guy because he was saying, all of these different Christian beliefs that yes, the vast majority of people are Christian, even though that's false. So therefore they all support all of his Christian beliefs. I'm going, dude, there's more than 44,000 distinct sects of Christianity in the world. Virtually any Christian belief that you come up with, even the most common ones, are only held by a percentage of that. Most people, even most Christians, disagree with most Christian doctrines.
Yeah, well, I mean, and you run into a situation where, to be honest, if you're going to start saying everyone's a Christian, then you have to accept everyone's a Christian. And I'll bet you that most fundamentalists in, like, say, America do not consider the Catholic Church to be Christian. In fact, no, actually, come to think of it, I can tell you that because where my mom used to grow up, they talked about how the Pope wore the mitre to disguise the horns on his head. The whole Whore of Babylon thing. So, yeah, I mean, if you're going to even say that, then you have to accept that all these other sects are, equally viable as yours, and most of these groups don't.
Well, of course not. They don't think anybody is right except for them. I just put up a video on YouTube today about this asshole pastor in this place in Tempe, Arizona. He spent just this huge amount of time just out there screaming about how he wanted Caitlyn Jenner to die and go to hell. And it's like, you people are living in your own little fantasy world. I mean, all of these really hate-filled churches, the ones that are really against, you know, the gays and the transsexuals, and yeah, essentially they're against everything. These are the people who, I mean, this dude, his church is in a fucking strip mall storefront. All right. He's probably got 10 people in his entire congregation. Westboro Baptist, their entire congregation, no matter how vocal they are, they got 39 effing people. You know, that's all that they can possibly find to support all this hate. And these people act like they're the majority, and they're wrong.
And, you know, the thing is that when you look at these people, I mean, and that's unfortunately the advantage of the internet. It really allows anybody who is, you know, has an internet connection, can get 30 or 40 people together, can say something clickbait worthy. All of a sudden, they start to, get more people listening to them because they are so completely outraged.
Yeah, but I don't think that they have people listening to them. I think that they have people pointing and laughing.
Well, yeah.
You know, I mean, this guy, the only reason anybody pays attention to them, or the Westboro Baptists, or the crazy snake handlers, or any of that kind of stuff, the only reason anybody pays any attention to them is because these people are fucking bad theater. You know, they're out there laughing at these people going, you guys are a bunch of goddamn idiots. And these people act like any attention is good attention, and they're wrong.
Yeah, well, it's one of these ridiculous things that you hear again and again and again that, you know, you're trying to avoid. They're trying to get people listening to them, and, well, you know, in one respect, it's good news. It's good news because, we don't have to worry about having to make the case of why they're so terrible. You just got to point to wherever they're opening their mouth.
Yeah.
I mean, let's face it. That's one advantage.
Well, true.
But yeah, I mean, these groups are just ridiculous.
Well, they are, but there's so many of them. And maybe it's just because we've got the internet and we've got YouTube and we can see just piles and piles and piles of them anytime we want to. There's probably always been these completely ridiculous wingnut whack job religious idiots out there. But Jesus Christ, I mean, do you people not listen to yourselves? What the hell is going on?
Well, no, they don't. Or they think that they're the lone voice screaming in the wilderness, and one day, you know, everybody will acknowledge that they're the right person, and, you know, yada, yada, yada. Or they just enjoy, you know, having attention, and they don't care what type of attention they get. Yeah,
because I guess they think that people are going to listen to them, and they're going to have this sudden revelation of, oh my God, these people are right, and we're going to go sit on our butts in their storefront and listen to this guy scream from the pulpit.
Yeah. Yeah, and that is not, you know, hopefully, that is not going to happen.
Yeah, well, speaking of crazies, let's go talk about some more crazies.
Louisiana school defends using the Bible to present alternative viewpoints when teaching evolution. A Louisiana school district is speaking out in defense of teachers who use the Bible to present alternative viewpoints when teaching on evolution, despite claims from secular science that teaching creationism is unconstitutional and scientifically misleading. Well, let's rephrase and make the news article a little more accurate. Despite statements from secular scientists that teaching creationism has about the same relevance to science as training a doctor to grab a chicken, cut the chicken, and read the chicken's entrails to diagnose his or her patient's ailments. Yeah, this is a case for, once again, Louisiana, Deep South. Why do we get so many of these stories from the Deep South? I think it's the water. They are arguing that they have the right, that this is a legitimate tool to criticize evolution. One email they got stated, we will read in Genesis and them, sick, yes, the teacher can't spell, some supplemental material debunking various aspects of evolution from which the students will present. Yeah, okay, no. We're just, in fact, let's go with another term. No.
Yeah, I mean, These people just love to waste tax money, don't they? I mean, every single case where this has ever gone to court, without exception, the separation of church and state has won. Religion has lost every single time, and this is going to be no different. These people don't learn.
Yeah, and the thing is that, as you said, this is not going to work. The moment someone brings it up to the court is going to say, yeah, this isn't even intelligent design, which the court has knocked down time and time again. You know, let's understand this. Even intelligent design, when they file off the serial numbers, it gets up to the courts look at it, you know, you get the Tommy Lee Jones, son, I am disappointed expression, and it gets knocked down. There is no way to read this as anything other than promoting not simply religion, but a specific religion. Because obviously, if we're going to speak about that, why don't we speak about the creation myths of the Native Americans who once lived in Louisiana?
Exactly.
Or the Navajo Indians, or the Aztec, or the Greeks, or if you want more extant religions, Buddhist, Hindu, religions that have no creation myth because they claim the earth has always been here. This is not that. This is an attempt to use a class that is theoretically for science, to indoctrinate students in not simply a Christian viewpoint, because, I mean, let's be honest, the Catholic Church has long said, they have no problem with evolution. They kind of wiggle it by saying at some point a soul was put in the body, but the vast majority of Catholics accept that the story of creation in Genesis was allegorical and evolution happens roughly the way the scientists say it does, in the sense that it is the way we got to where we are today. So this isn't even a Christian viewpoint. This is a small Christian viewpoint.
But they don't care. They don't care at all. I mean, maybe we ought to be teaching demonology as an alternative to germ theory, and
I wouldn't go there.
And I'm sure they would. If we can teach creationism, why don't we teach panspermia? And what the fuck? Anything goes. The fact is, schools exist to teach facts, not just old ridiculous belief systems that have been completely discredited. Anything that you care to come down the pike with, hell, we'll just throw that in there as a quote unquote alternative view. That's not how the world works, dudes.
Yeah, and especially since, again, it is focusing on a certain viewpoint of Christianity. Again, this isn't even saying that, well, maybe evolution didn't work. This is attempting to use a text that is specifically pointed towards one small not even the majority segment. If you consider the Catholic Church isn't into this sort of thing, and most major mainline Protestant churches aren't into this sort of thing, you're talking about a tiny, tiny, tiny segment of even the Christianity.
Yeah, but I'm sure most of the people in that specific area, they are all that particular brand of Christianity.
And this is a factor you got to look at as one of the benefits of the internet, because in all truth of the matter is, in the past, this would go because nobody living in that community probably wants to eat the flack for standing up against people. Like I said, it can be a serious problem for you if you're in that community. Of course, now you get it out on the internet, and then you have people, most importantly the federal government, coming in who does not care about your little community. They are uninterested in the fact that, y'all never work in this town again, son. And it's like, well, that's interesting. I work in Washington.
Yeah.
And this is something that is going to really smash, this, if they try to defend it, they're going to lose money. I mean, they're going to lose money. They're going to go to the court, because also looking at, one of the things that they're trying to argue is that it's not illegal because we allow teachers to use this. We actually, let me find this state. The district does not provide creationist literature as supplements in our courses, but it does allow educators to use the Bible as supplementary material in presenting alternative viewpoints to evolution. No. Again, I've taught that's no. Houston, you have a problem, because the teacher is in the class by the power of the state. The students have to sit their asses down in that class by the power of the state. Now, if they wanted to say a teacher's having an after-school class, not as a teacher, but as a private citizen, then, they'd probably be safe, because the court has ruled that, as long as it's clear it's not being promoted by the school, obviously the teacher has a right for free speech. I would expect not many kids would go to a class presented after school that has no impact on their grades. But no, this as given is completely unconstitutional. It's going to get smacked down. You can't use the Bible as supplementary material in a science class, end of argument, full stop. Because the Bible is not science. You could use it in a religious class. You could use it in a history class. I mean, obviously you can't get away from Christianity and the Bible if you're talking about American history, but not in a class where you're trying to quote unquote present an alternative viewpoint to evolution, because the Bible does not present an alternative viewpoint to evolution. The Bible presents a mythological.
Yeah, well, I mean, I love how they're saying, well, the teachers are doing it. Like, the district has nothing to do with this. The teachers are doing it. Well, if it's really the teachers that are doing this on their own, then the parents ought to be able to sue the teachers directly, and then sue the school for allowing it, and then sue the district for allowing them to do something that's just beyond the purview of the school district. I mean, sue the shit out of everybody. Sue for monetary damages if you can get away with it. I want them to make this hurt. I want the teachers to go into court and lose and go bankrupt and lose their houses. I want to see, I want it to see this thing to be so painful to everybody involved, so personally painful, so that it's not just taxpayer money that's being thrown away, because we all know nobody gives a shit about taxpayer money.
Yeah, well, that probably won't happen because the various policies in the law right now. But, in all truthfulness, something needs to be done, because secondly, this is kind of hurting the students, because I'm looking right now at Alex, the American Legislative Exchange Council's list on education rankings, and the education rankings by state, and there's other ones out here. This I think is the ranking by the Department of Education. But the fact of the matter is that Louisiana is number 48.
For a reason.
Yeah, I mean, the bad payments, bad budgets. I mean, Louisiana's terrible on budgetary issues. They're terrible on a lot of issues, but it doesn't help when you're indoctrinating your children in a science class of something that would make you a lousy scientist.
But these people don't care.
No, they don't. They don't care. And that is the problem. Because number one, a lot of these people like poor people, and they like ignorant people, because poor and ignorant means, not asking, questions. And as you said, they don't care, because once you've graduated and you've got your shiny diploma, no one really seems to care that half the universities in the nation are going to look at where you came from and go, oh yeah, let's take a look at your actual entrance exams instead of your grades. Which, happens a lot, and to my mind, I'm not always very, I understand why schools have to be protected from some lawsuits, but equally, I think there comes a point if a school is graduating students who are consistently unable to progress beyond that school because the education they received was so utterly substandard, yeah, you should be able to come back and say, I'm going to sue you. Because we're not talking about, cases where, okay, bad students come out. We're talking cases where even students who got nothing but A's find themselves unemployable from some of these school districts. Literally you can get A's, which is supposed to mean excellent, and in my experience a couple of times over at Fullerton, these were people walking in with A's, bursting into tears because they did not understand why they were unable to do the material. And the answer was you were unable to do the material because your teachers, your administrators, and your school district completely failed you, took the federal and state money, and I don't know, they spent it on, hookers and blow, because they sure as hell weren't spending it on your education.
Well, unfortunately, this gets right back to why we actually need to have national educational standards, so that you can't do this shit. Right. So people in Louisiana and Mississippi and bumfuck Texas and all the rest of that, they can't be going, well, we're just going to teach you out of the Bible because we're so fucking stupid that we believe that's really true. No, that should never be acceptable. I don't give a shit what you believe. What you believe is irrelevant. You're a fucking teacher. This is your job. Here's how you have to do it.
Right, and if you're a teacher in a science class, I'm sorry, if you believe that the Bible is a science, a scientific source, you have failed the first measure of a scientist, which is to be able to evaluate information. I mean, you got this from I don't know if we've ever gone over this, but of course Bob Jones University and Abeka Publications, which some schools tried to use as textbooks, and then the court system kind of smacked them down, will have it right out in the front. Oh, by the way, if anything in science contradicts the Bible must be right. And no, the Bible's not right.
I don't give a shit what their religious beliefs are, because they're stupid.
But it shouldn't have any place in a college. And it shouldn't have any place in a class, a science class. Because a science class is to teach
Yeah, but
science.
probably these science teachers came right out of these science classes and went right back into them as teachers, and they're teaching the same bullshit that they learned.
Yeah, which is why it's important to smack this stuff down. I mean, you know, the thing is that, and the problem, of course, is that, again, we get back to the fact that this is a tiny segment of even Christianity, and it's sad to say it's really located in the South. It is a segment that is hostile to any type of learning, hostile to any kind of critical thinking. I mean, you know, we're not talking like the Catholic Church with their viewpoints on science. We're not talking about mainstream churches. We're talking about small little churches in small little communities that often are locally dominant. And again, the internet is providing a nasty wake-up call to them because it's getting harder and harder and harder to conceal this stuff. And hopefully, I want to keep up on this because I'm hoping that we're going to see that town, that school district have to change their policy. Of course, you'll have to keep looking at them because changing a policy doesn't mean...
Of course not. I mean, they can probably end up being the next Kitzmiller and not matter because 5 years later they're going to try to do the same damn thing because these people don't care.
Right.
You know, we really need to be and that's why I really want to see this stuff hurt. I want to see it be personal because it's going to stop people. It's going to make them think, well, wait a minute. If I go and I do this stupid thing that I know is already blatantly illegal and I should never be able to get away with, I'm going to get slapped down really hard. I'm going to get my fucking house taken away. I'm going to get my teaching credentials taken away. All this crap. I'm going to ruin my life by trying to do this crap that has already been decided in the courts. So I'm not going to do it. But so long as it's just taxpayer money and what the fuck? And the taxpayers are probably all completely on board with this because they're all a bunch of ignorant, stupid, religious bullfuck assholes. So,
well, that's a problem in that, you know, taking money away from the district. Of course, one of the problems is then they get to play the martyr card. On the other hand, there should be a policy to where, you know, higher authorities can say, you're not providing an education. We in the federal government are giving you money for that education. So now we're going to take your district over. You know, we did it with Chrysler. You know, there comes a time, because let's face it, getting a good education just isn't important on a local level. It is important on a national level. I mean, you can look at Louisiana. Louisiana is practically like in the 19th century economically. I mean, Louisiana is just a horrible, horrible place, when it comes to economics, and it shouldn't be. The damn thing's sitting right on a major, some of America's major, transit lines. It should be doing much better.
But it's not because they're all a bunch of fucking Southern morons who got their head in the Bible and they, you know, they need to pull their head out, so to speak.
Yeah, well, I mean, and you know, the thing is that, until this happens, you're going to start, it's going to be a long-running problem. And yeah, it needs to stop. I don't know, you know, legally there's so many obstacles in the way of actually, making teachers independently responsible, but I think at the very least, this is a sign why we need national standards. And if you don't teach by those national standards, obviously another profession is calling to you because you're not going to.
Yeah, but the thing is, they're claiming these teachers are taking personal responsibility and individual action to put the Bible in the classroom in the first place. They're not being told to do so by the district. They're doing it on their own. So how can they not be held individually responsible if they're doing this on their own?
Well, see, I'm not saying they shouldn't be. I'm just saying right now that there are a lot of obstacles in the law about that, and you're probably not going to be able to get that through without a lot of fight. But I'm saying on the other hand is that, well, first of all, if the teacher is individually teaching this in the classroom, they are violating their policies, they should lose their license. I mean, you know, because you can't do a lot else with a teacher's license other than teach, with a teacher's credential. If you start being serious, saying, look, if you do this, we're removing you from the classroom, we're removing your credential, that money you just spent to get the teaching credential, is now useless to you. Yeah, you're going to get some teachers who keep doing this, but other ones are going to come up, realize, hey, I got student loans to pay off, and then get on board.
Yeah, but the problem is that the districts themselves will never fire these teachers. Never. They're doing it like this because they're saying, hey, it's not us. You can't sue us. Well, then who do we sue? You can't sue the teachers because the laws don't permit that. You can't sue the district because the district is going, hey, we're not telling them to do it.
You actually can sue the district because the problem is that it doesn't matter what the district is telling the teachers to do. It is a case where if the teacher is in the classroom, by definition, the district is supporting the teacher because the teacher is in the classroom with the legal authority to keep those children in the classroom. In other words, whatever the teacher says, and whatever the district says, it is the district's responsibility, legal responsibility, to direct the teacher and not allow the teacher to engage in activities that
I know that and you know that, but
so,
come on, we both know this is what the district is thinking.
This is what the district is saying. And like I said, that's where you start pulling the teachers, you start trying to pull the teachers' credentials. If necessary, you take the district over and, it's rare. And to be honest, if the district is doing this, I have deep reservations about the quality of the rest of the teaching they give. So, and you unfortunately, you have to be in it for the long haul. I mean, the South and all the places like this, because we got occasionally places like this in California, but fortunately California, New England and other places like that, they generally are somewhat more proactive on it. But in these areas, you're in for the long haul. I mean, in all seriousness, it's going to be a long fight. And I have to say, the ones I feel most sympathetic to are the students who are going to come in and increasingly finding themselves unable to compete in the 21st century. And, which is, at least in my suspicious mind, part of the reason.
Well, I don't think they're doing it on purpose, but I don't think that they're having a big problem with it, that happens.
I don't think they're doing it on purpose, but equally these groups, I mean, especially in the South, if you look at the history of education, the South has always been resistant to a lot of forms of education because, they've always been very suspicious, very hostile to the idea of a middle class, building up an education, people who aren't, dependent on various types of patronage in the area. So, I don't think they're doing it deliberately, but this is part of very long-running societal problems in these areas. And the best way to solve it is to attack the schools, start changing the schools. But that's why there's going to be so much.
Well, of course, because they want to maintain their way of life, even if their way of life sucks.
Yeah, well, I mean, the problem is that, it's just, it's fighting this boogeyman, and guys, you're making a rearguard defense. You should consider what happened when you tried to fight for the, for the spontaneous generation theory. And it didn't work so.
Yeah.
It didn't work out so well.
Well, speaking about stupid people in the South. All right.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Well, it's about time. Following the shooting last week in which 9 members of a predominantly black Southern church were killed by a man often showed parading around with a Confederate flag, pretty much everybody has decided it's time for the flag of the Confederacy to go. Okay, granted, it's not really the Confederate flag, but you can't expect ignorant Southerners to know that. So, should it be tossed into the historical trash, or should Southern bigots wander around with it plastered everywhere? Inquiring minds want to know.
Yes, the Confederate flag, the banner, and the cause for which it has been fought for has done more damage to this nation than any of our foreign enemies. The South fought a ruthless war, and yes, people, just read any preamble of any Southern Constitution or Contract of Secession, and you will find out it was about slavery. I'm sorry, it was. After that, a savage war which led to more American dead than any other major war after that. We engaged in decades of terror directed against American citizens until the period known as Redemption brought the return of white supremacist rule to the South, and we had to pretty much fight the whole damn sorry mess over in the 1960s to once again remind people that yes, if you're an American citizen, you can vote. You don't have to guess how many marbles are in a jar, and you don't have to give a lecture in a language you don't know. But sadly, something about being able to scream, the South will rise again brought this up until now. And I think really what happened now is you get all the people saying how terrible the South was played, and we have a person who, like you said, waved the Southern flag around, he waved the Rhodesian flag around, he waved the South African flag around, all noted for countries that aren't really with us anymore. And then we saw the bravery and the courage of the flower of Southern manhood when he walked into a prayer meeting, sat down with people who invited him to pray with them, and then cold-bloodedly, after making certain there was no one there who with a gun themselves, pulled out his gun and murdered 9 people in cold blood. Nothing quite says courage like
yeah,
shooting
well,
on
what do you
Army.
expect?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a real tipping point, because if people look, I'm going to do the history wonk thing. Sorry, everybody. But really, the myth of the lost cause of the South is probably one of the greatest propaganda jobs, starting with Birth of a Nation, ever. And that's exactly what it was. It was a myth. Reconstruction was not that terrible. If you want to see what Reconstruction could have been like, look at just about any other history where there's a nasty civil war and what happens to the losing side. Reconstruction arguably wasn't harsh enough, by the simple measure that the various racists and secessionists were in a perfect position to regain power in the South. For now, what we're seeing increasingly, fortunately, is the undoing of that. Nowhere too soon, because people are looking at the flag, they're looking at what the flag represents, and they're realizing that Roof may have carried out his actions, but in all truthfulness, he didn't do anything that a lot of these other groups wouldn't do if they thought they could get away with it. So, the South, the flag was a banner of racism, is the banner of insurgency. It was a flag under which soldiers marched and murdered not just Americans, but, like for instance, everyone talks about the Battle of Gettysburg. People need to remember one thing the Southern armies did on the way out in the Battle of Gettysburg was kidnap free blacks and carry them into the South as slaves. So, it's really nice. I did not think I was going to live to see this, but I am just really, really happy that finally major people, major groups are beginning to say, we don't want to be associated with this flag. It's going to make it so much easier.
Yeah, but unfortunately, there's a lot of people out there who want to be associated with this flag. They sit there and go, well, this flag is part of who we are. What? Assholes? Losers? I mean, I know people haven't gotten it through your tiny little fucking pea brains that the South lost the Civil War, but seriously, if that's part of who you are, then you're all a bunch of fucking idiots.
And, the other point is that it was a battle flag. It was around for about 4 years. It went away, but it's important to note, and this is, when we talk about this, and I could be here until people drop dead of old age, so I'll try not to, but it's really the creation of an entire mythology of victimization so that you can justify ignoring the manifold sins of the South. I mean, if you look at, for instance, hardly anybody knows that in 1921 in Tulsa, Oklahoma, there was a flat-out pogrom. It was originally called the Black Wall Street of America because it was one of the most prosperous African-American communities in America. Very prosperous, lots of educated people there, and it was essentially annihilated. And the problem is that you can't say it was annihilated because it was any threat. You can probably say it was annihilated because it was prosperous and a threat to the dominant ideology. You get into the look of like the lost cause. What was the lost cause? We revolted in the service of slavery. We marched out. We didn't even wait. I mean, this is another factor. The South didn't even wait until anything was done about slavery. With Dred Scott, it would have been decades. The moment that they lost an election, they didn't wait until Lincoln did anything, and honestly, while Lincoln would not have permitted the spread of slavery from all of his books and diaries, it's fairly obvious that he was not at all interested in sparking a major conflict by trying to eliminate slavery. Lincoln was not the abolitionist a lot of people make him out to be. But regardless, the South threw a huge temper tantrum when they lost an election, and their answer to losing an election was launch one of the most savage wars in modern history in America. Yeah, and then, like I said, then in the 1920s, they start coming back. But to get back to the flag, the flag was not really popular in this model up until the Civil Rights Revolution. Most of these flags you see flying in Southern capitals were not raised out of Southern pride. They were raised as an explicit defiance of the various civil rights and voting rights acts that were coming out. So, no, there is nothing good about this flag. If you want to march around with it for your culture, go ask a German how he feels about marching under the swastika as part of his culture. He'll tell you what the South should damn well learn, which is the swastika represents a very dark time in my culture, that we try to learn from, but we do not honor.
Yeah, but these people do. These people do. These people love it. These people are fucking idiots. And I mean, I'm all for freedom, but I'm all for responsibility. The states, they've got no business flying the flag of what is essentially a foreign government, and I think that goes for flying Mexican flags and all that shit too, but these states should not be flying what is a foreign flag, because the Confederate States of America is not the United States of America under which they live.
And not simply a foreign flag, but a foreign flag associated with war against the United States, a foreign flag that was used by a state that honestly, you know, it would be like, hey, if you're a Jew, would you feel bad if they were, you know, well, the Third Reich was part of our history, so we're just going to put, you know, the outside the Reichstag, a little thing with the swastika flying under. I mean, you know, the war was about slavery. A substantial percentage of your population, if that flag had triumphed, would be property today. You know, and you know, I know people say that slavery probably would not have lasted. No, I think it would have lasted until we would have seen something horrifically ugly erupt, because the South was not going to give up slavery. Slavery is, or was, a social part. They did not just see it as an economic part of their society. It was a social part. And, you know, you also get into the thing when you look at all of this is that, yeah, I mean, if you want to raise the flag yourself, okay, you're a jackass. Sorry. You know, but the state has no right to promote these flags.
But you got to remember that this is also, and getting back to the last story, this is also all about religion too. I mean, these people, a big part of their Christianity is the right to own slaves, the right to, hey, white people are better than black people.
And you know, that is one of the interesting things historically, because obviously certain religions like the Quakers, oh God, the Quakers were deaf on slavery. I mean, the Quakers were a big part of why slavery went away from the North and why slavery went away from Great Britain. But one of the unique things about the South is that while there was some initial stirrings to abolition among Southern church, very quickly, historically, those churches become an integral part of maintaining the institution of slavery. And then after that, they become an integral part of maintaining the institution of segregation and, you know, anti-mixed race marriages and stuff like that. The Southern churches become a very major part of the, bulwark, the ideological bulwark of this attitude. And, you know, it's not just that. It's if you look at the Southern strategy with the Republican Party, the South ate the Republican Party. It wasn't the other way around, because before then, the Republican Party would have been considered, you know, small business, small regulatory, but equally, they were widely known as the party, you know, a fairly strong party on civil rights. But the problem is that if you have a part of the country that is oligarchic and corrupt and, you know, people really don't have to run for election, i.e. Strom Thurmond or other Dixiecrats, they're obviously going to come to dominate a party where everybody else has to actually work to get reelected. And I mean, you saw how corrupt the South was back then, because all these Southerners who had been Democrats their entire life.
Oh yeah, because the Republican Party was promising them segregation, state control over education, all this other stuff, so that they could re-implement racism. That was the whole point of the whole thing.
And they didn't win. But, you know, really seriously, if you are a fan of small government, probably one of the greatest blows to America was this decision by the Republican Party, because all of a sudden it ties one of the parties so tightly to racism. Almost everything else they do is, there's a reason why if you look at maps, electoral maps, the Republican Party is so centered in the South anymore. They lost most of the North. They lost a good chunk of the West. And you know, another factor is one thing that gets me about these groups is you're going to hear the scream, it's the federal government crushing our liberties. They want us, you know, and when you look at that, what you really have to say is that if there was one part in America where the state was more directly involved in your private life, it was the South. I mean, no, segregation was not a voluntary thing, and I'm not just talking for blacks. If you wanted to set up a restaurant that served blacks and whites equally in the South, not going to happen. Before the Civil War, the South had internal passports. The South had, every state was perfectly willing to open your mail and look into it to make certain that you weren't getting abolitionist messages. I mean, you know, the South was about as close as America comes to a dictatorship.
And they still would be today if they could get away with it. That's the thing.
They still would be today because there's been many a case. I mean, when you look at cases like this, usually a lot of cases, normally I believe that the government should probably, as much as possible, stay out of affairs. But, when people start ranting that the various federal judicial agencies are still watching some southern states as far as voting rights go, it's like, no. You guys proved beyond a shadow of a doubt. Blacks had the right to vote after the Civil War. Right after redemption, you spend the next 20 years stripping all of those rights away from them with the occasional celebratory lynch mob. And they were celebratory. People brought there's nothing says love for a mother for her little 5-year-old like bringing her to the point where a man is going to be burned alive, and then restored it and destroyed their right to vote. The South lost the right for us to ever take them at their word, and they say that they're not trying to go after somebody's right to vote, right to be a citizen.
Well, no, I mean, I'd say they could actually gain our trust back, but they have to do a hell of a lot of work. And so far, they've done absolutely nothing whatsoever to gain anybody's trust, because every time we stop looking at them real close, they turn around and do it again.
Right. And part of this, really quite apart from legalization, I won't say I'm happy, because obviously none of these 9 people deserved to die. I mean, we are nasty torch religion on this podcast. I don't think anybody will ever mistake us for being a pro-religion podcast. But these were people who were in a prayer meeting, who were trying to receive and give comfort to other people, saw a stranger, invited him to take part because they figured he might need it, and they were murdered for their pains.
And the religious people want everybody to go, oh, it's an attack on Christianity. Like hell.
Well, I think that's people who are trying to disguise the fact that this was a racist attack, because there's been a tremendous amount of people screaming, well, this couldn't be racist, because again, they're trying to protect that damn lost cause myth, which is a myth. I mean, the Confederate flag is not a flag you should honor. It is not a flag you should fly. It is a historical footnote that did a tremendous amount of damage to this nation, still does do damage to this nation. It is the banner of racists, rapists, incestuous people. It is something that needs to be taken the hell down. You need to put it the same. And, as I said, the one good news here is I hope eventually we get to the level where automatically, just like we know if we see a guy walking around with a Nazi flag, automatically you're dealing with an asshole. You don't need to say, well, does he really know what it is? And, I'm thinking that the decision of these companies to stop selling is a good step on that way. Now, there is something we can take from this that is positive. Everybody, I hope, knows eBay and Amazon and all these other companies, they have a religion. I mean, and it is a religion that they are very loyal to. It's called the religion of green. They want money. And if they are doing this, it is obvious that they are also coming to the conclusion that the amount of flack they will get from people who are pro-flag is less than the kudos they'll get from people who are anti-flag. So this is a sign that maybe after damn well too long, we could be seeing yet another seismic shift where people are beginning to accept that was a bad time in American history. It was not a time to honor. Let us move on to hopefully a nation where nobody gives a damn about your color. And we can start doing that by dropping the slaver's flag.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'd love to see the Southerners boycott Walmart. I mean, where the fuck else are they going to go?
Well, yeah, I mean, and that's an issue. I mean, and part of this, just to get back into the feeling, the South really seriously, especially the Deep South, has never been able to accept the answer to the question of if we are so much better than Northerners, which, is one of the things they would always say. You actually got propaganda in before the Civil War talking about how every Southerner was better than a Northerner because Northerners had no respect, no honor. Why is the South such an economic clusterfuck? You can't say it was just because of Reconstruction, because there was a lot of investment during Reconstruction. You can't say it's because the government hasn't thrown money at the South. I mean, hell, there's NASA bases all through the South because Johnson did that. You can't say it's because some magical force field. Texas is doing relatively well, but these deep central states of the South have always suffered from this severe economic underdevelopment. And it's only getting better now because around the 50s and the 60s, that's when you start seeing a new generation of Southern politicians who did start investing a little bit more in education. A little bit more in internal improvements. But in all seriousness, I think a lot of this is because, again, you're going to have to sit back and ask, why are these states so backwards? They shouldn't be. They're some of the oldest states in the Union, but why have they been left behind?
Because they're all a bunch of religious retards?
Well, and because they have states that don't spend much money on education, they don't have much interest, and honestly, I think it's because they continually focus on how terrible everybody else was to them instead of sitting down and saying, look, we should have a lot of human capital here. I mean, that's one thing you can look at. I mean, if you look at the South from the end of the Civil War up until the Civil Rights Revolution, a African-American student was lucky to learn how to read in the schools they gave them because the schools were deliberately awful. Well, if you take a huge percentage of your human capital and you deliberately handicap it, as well as poor whites, because poor whites weren't much better off when it came to schools, your state's not going to be very attractive for anyone wanting to found a business in the 21st century.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've got lots of friends who live in the South, and all of them, without exception, they all say what a horrible, awful place it is to live. I mean, not just educationally, not just any of that, just the people are just assholes, complete and total dicks to everybody. And if you don't fall into their particular little religious club, holy shit, you get treated like crap, you get abused, you get robbed, you get your shit broken. I mean, they're out and they have no problem with it. They're absolutely on top. Hey, if you're not a fundamentalist Christian, fuck it. I'm going to break your shit. I'm going to steal your stuff. Just because you deserve it, because you're not part of our religious club.
And, even before the Civil War, I mean, it's important to note that when, one of the enduring myths is that, the South is less dangerous than the North. No. Murder rates in the South have always, rural murder rates in the antebellum South exceeded urban murder rates in the North. I mean, that is usually exactly the opposite way. I mean, usually the rural regions have less crime than urban regions, but not in the South. I mean, and part of the problem is that the South made such a fetish of this, Southern honor. You see it on Bugs Bunny all the time. So you have this, you have dishonored me. And then Bugs Bunny does something to make Yosemite Sam look even stupider. But, fundamentally, it got to the point where, obviously, if you have a caste-based culture, which is what they had, a person can't let any insult to his quote-unquote honor go, because that means that you don't have to treat him well. And you still got remnants of that today. And if you look at the South, parts of the South that are improving are, well, either not the Deep South or urban regions where more and more people are coming from out of that region. They're coming in. The South is being displaced. The traditional South didn't so much get better as it's dying off. And this is an important, this could be an important step because honestly, Alcoholics Anonymous will let you know the first step of solving a problem is to admit you've got a problem. And the South has never admitted it has a problem. They've never seriously admitted, look, we have a problem that has endured since the Civil War itself.
Because they don't care. Come on.
Well, they don't want to in a lot. I mean, a lot of those southern little haulers and places like that, because I had family in the South, they chew on past wrongs like they happened yesterday. I mean, you'll hear people talk about Abraham Lincoln like he was just driving through Georgia with a column of M1 main battle tanks. And I think it's another reason you'll notice a lot of people who leave the South don't go back.
I wouldn't go in the first place.
Well, I mean, but you get people, leaving the South, in some places. In other places, like for instance, right now we've got the Midwest that's suffering the biggest demographic thing. But for a while, you see people leaving the South for better opportunities. Some of them are coming back. Now, one of the funny things is that again, if you look at the areas of the South that are getting better, they are the areas of the South that are beginning to improve their facilities. Like Charlotte has a light rail system. Dallas is working hard on rebuilding their downtown areas. Atlanta is trying to build stuff around their Beltline Railroad. You've got areas to where now I think probably the South more than anywhere else, you're beginning to see that massive urban-rural divide. Parts of the South are still as bad as they were. parts of the South are really trying to move into the 21st century. And that's going to be interesting for future politics, because what's going to happen, you know?
Well, you've got the people who are actually trying to improve, and I'm sure those are also the areas where you're getting improved race relations, where you're getting, you know, you don't have the stereotypical Southern racist, you know, who's out there, you know, he'd be running over blacks if he could. You know, you're getting these big cities that are actually developing where you've actually got black mayors, and you'd never see that shit in rural Kentucky and Mississippi and all that shit. You know, you would never see that in these little tiny racist towns. But you've got the big cities where people have kind of given up on this stuff because you've got enough people who have come in from outside, as opposed to these little tiny places where, you know, people have lived there, born, lived and died there for generation on generation on generation, and they've never gone more than 50 miles from their house. These people have never improved.
Yeah. Well, and then there's other parts. I mean, you know, it's always dangerous. I mean, I think especially today, we should also thank the internet. The internet brings the world to your door. So a lot of these areas may be changing. I don't know if we have any demographic information about that yet. I probably should have checked on that. But, you know, a lot of these areas may also be changing because, let's face it, it's much easier today to keep in touch with the rest of the world. You know, in the 20s, 30s, 40s, if you live in some tiny little town, you might go your entire life without ever reading anything other than the town newspaper or talking to anybody else in the town. That's not the case today. And so I'm not certain, because, I mean, we should give a certain amount of due. Things are better in the South than they were. You know, and it's not better enough, because again, that never to be sufficiently damn flagged, but equally nibbling in from the parts that aren't the South, you know, that were not the Deep South, because obviously the Deep South is where the biggest core of these issues are. The Deep South was always most wedded to slavery and cotton. The Deep South had, you know, no other economy to speak of. And so that's probably going to be where your problems are always going to stay. But equally, I think we could hopefully start seeing changes. And a big part of this change, to get back to the story, is if you realize that increasingly nobody else likes this flag. Nobody else sees this flag as a symbol of anything honorable. Yes, you'll get the diehards, but equally you'll get some people who may say, well, okay, I guess I won't fly it anymore. And that's the start. That's the start of a change. Not the end, mind you. It's going to be a long time before we get to the end. But it's at least a start.
Yeah, and as long as we get to the point where we just know that the people who are flying it, they're just the assholes, and they're the ones that should be avoided, well, that's a pretty good start, and we can start to weed those people out.
And, you know, I have some friends who do Civil War reenactments, too, and they say, yeah, that's a problem they've got, because you've got the people in there who are doing it because they like the historical aspect of the reenactment, and other people who are in there because they really wish that, you know, the war had gone differently, and it can be a little difficult. See, the problem I have, I do not wish the South ill. Because, you know, the South is one of the great tragedies of America when you think of just how much human capital has been wasted. You know, there's no reason the South should not be equal to the North, equal to California. These states are old states. They should, you know, there is no reason they should not be moving up and contributing to the rest of America as a part of the 21st century. They have made themselves into this. You cannot blame Reconstruction. You cannot blame, you know, any outside force, because, you know, so many of these wounds were self-inflicted. They have, in large part, helped leave us a legacy of racial issues that's going to be a long time getting rid of. But equally, if they want to come out, you know, if the South wants to come out of this and to rebuild their education, to rebuild and to rejoin America, I wish them all the luck, because, you know, I personally gain no joy from thinking, oh, there's a little town down here that's, you know, terribly educated, living in terrible economic straits, and, you know, flies the flag because honestly, what else do they have? You know, that's a terrible way to live. So it's my hope that this is the start of the South joining America as a major part of the 21st century and marching on.
Yeah, because it's not so much about wishing them ill. It's just wishing they stop holding us all back.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, and that is unfortunate, because, if you look, because, for instance, many people don't know, but one of the greatest oppositions to the GI Bill were people in the South. They were afraid that blacks were going to be able to use the GI Bill to get an education. So, I mean, you've got elected representatives of the South literally saying, I'm going to deny millions of our own people who just went off and served their country because we can't possibly have a black get an education. Fortunately, they didn't win, but, that kind of zero-sum game just needs to go away forever. And then the Southern flag is a big part. Getting rid of the Southern flag as an emblem of honor is a good way to start doing that.
All right, well, we should probably move on to our last story for the week.
The Supreme Court has struck down a case about issuing a passport to a person with Jerusalem as their point of origin. Or rather, to record in their passport Israel as their place of birth. Now, this is a 6-3 decision. It's a victory for the executive. It's actually not that surprising to my mind because, traditionally this has always been handled by the executive branch. Israel, however, is special. The problem is, and why would the executive branch not want to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel or as a part of Israel? Well, first of all, because the United States government has never recognized Jerusalem as a part of Israel. Congress likes to, but the executive hasn't. The reason the executive doesn't want to do that is because Jerusalem is not considered part of Israel by most nations, and it would cause major issues with the currently non-existent peace process if we were to do so. So the argument is they're not allowed to put Jerusalem on the passport, Israel on the passport. In that way, we do not see the United States government being claimed to state that Jerusalem is a part of Israel. And, again, it was a 6-3. Roberts, Scalia, Roberts, and Alito were the dissent. Interestingly enough, Thomas wasn't. So I'm not entirely certain how that worked out there. But the fact of the matter is that Roberts is being a little disingenuous here because the statute of question does not imply recognition, but simply gives an American citizen born in Jerusalem the option to designate his place of birth as Israel for the purposes of passports and other documents. It is not going to be read that way. And, this is a case where Congress is trying to force the president's hand on a very important issue of foreign policy. And it's not going to happen. And, Congress honestly is being a bit of a dick for doing it because Congress is not going to be the one to have to eat the negative implications.
Well, I get so sick and tired of all this political correctness bullshit. I really do. This whole, we might offend the Muslims if we start saying that Jerusalem is part of Israel. Well, fuck the Muslims and fuck Israel and fuck them all. I mean, I really get sick and tired of all this crap. This stuff, it's just stupid.
Well, see, the problem is that we haven't recognized. I mean, the first issue is that the U.S. hasn't recognized. I mean, our embassy's not in Jerusalem. We've recognized that it's not part of Israel. It's something to be left for the negotiation. So I think it's not so much in this case political correctness as Congress trying to force the president to give a de facto recognition. And that's what it's going to be read as by most foreign countries. And that, of course, makes a problem for the president because the entire region is on fire.
Yeah, but it's not our job to recognize anything. It's Israel's job to say, this is our capital. This is the capital we are declaring that we have. We don't have to sit around and go, well, we just don't feel like paying attention. We're going to keep our eyes shut. Well, no, that's stupid.
Well, it gets, but we recognize and not recognize other areas. I mean, recognition is really important as to whether or not a land does it. We did not recognize, a number of split off groups. We still don't recognize the PA. I mean, let's face it. If you're going to recognize somebody, why don't you recognize the Palestinian Authority? Because they are serving in the role of a government and Israel's not occupying the land. Israel says they're not occupying the land. Well, we don't have a lot of differences between that, but we don't want to obviously.
No, but that's not what I'm saying. Israel is a recognized nation. All right? Israel as a nation has said, this is our capital. That's like us saying, well, fuck it, we're just going to refuse to recognize that Moscow is the capital of Russia.
Well, the problem here is
and Russia just kind of goes, yeah, well, fuck you up the ass. It doesn't matter what you recognize.
Yeah, well, see, the problem there is that Moscow, Israel, I mean, people have to remember, Israel is what Israel says because of the UN declaration in the 1940s, late 1940s when Israel was founded. It wasn't founded by God. I'm sorry, people. No, it wasn't. And if it was founded by God or if it was founded by King David, I think the Emperor Trajan rather conclusively withdrew that recognition when he burned the temple down. one of the things is that legally, you're right. Obviously, Israel has de facto control over Jerusalem. You know, they can do what they want with Jerusalem because they have de facto control. But it's always a little wiggy like that. I mean, we get into similar things right now where, you know, China's building these islands in the in the Japanese and South China Sea, trying to say, okay, we built the island, we claim it, it's our land, and the U.S. is going, nope.
Yeah, but that's a little bit different than what we're talking about here. We're talking about, well, you know, if China said, well, we're going to declare Tokyo the capital of China, we could say, all right, no. But, you know, as long as they're doing something that is their land, that has always been their capital, you can't just go, well, we're just going to decide that your capital isn't really your capital because we're not going to give some kind of assent to it. Bullshit.
Tel Aviv has been considered the capital. I mean, that's the one thing. They're trying to move the capital of Jerusalem, but Tel Aviv has been considered the capital of the state of Israel ever since its inception. I mean, that's where everybody's embassies are. And, you know, one of the problems is here, of course, is that this is the case where we've let this damn bleeding wound go on for year after year after year. I mean, nobody's been willing to sit down and tell the Israelis, you're going to make a deal on this. Or nobody's been willing to sit down and seriously, well, to be blunt, nobody wants to invest time and effort because, you know, in America, you've got the problem that there's a huge number of people who want Jerusalem to be Israel's capital because Jerusalem will be Israel's capital. Israel will rebuild the first temple. The Muslims will try to destroy Israel because they tore down the mosque, the Dome of the Rock. And then, of course, everybody knows that, and I'm not kidding you, I have heard this, the Jews will make the sacrifices in the temple that have not been made since the temple was destroyed because originally, you know, that was the only place you could make the traditional sacrifices to God. God will not return, and then depending on your particular belief, they will either be destroyed or flee and mass convert to Christ and thus kick off the time of tribulations. I mean, you know, one of the problems here is that we've got a lot of people in the U.S. and in Congress who really want this to happen.
And they're idiots.
Reasons. And they're idiots. And the problem is the kind of idiocy that will get a lot of people killed. I mean, you know, really, in all seriousness, Jerusalem should have been declared an international city, and it should have been kept an international city from the very beginning. But I would find it hard. I mean, I'm certain somewhere there's an issue that's been more screwed up over the years. Israel and its relationship with the surrounding countries is, if not number one, is pretty high on the list because the U.S., on the one hand, we tolerate a lot of BS from Israel, which seriously we could stop. But we won't because it's really not worth it to us. And again, we have so many people who are just will really do anything they want. I mean, one of the amazing things that's happened over the past couple of years wasn't that Netanyahu was such a jackass. It was that so many people started calling him on it. And that's impressive. You know, the time has come to tell the Israelis, look, God didn't give you Jerusalem. You can say the IDF gave you Jerusalem. You can say the United Nations gave you Israel. You can say the U.S. gave you parts of these lands. God had nothing to do with it.
That's very true.
There is no greater Israel. There will not be a greater Israel because you are sooner or later going to have to deal with the Palestinians in the Gaza and the Palestinian Authority. You cannot simply play this game of, well, we're not occupying them except when we want the authority of an occupying nation. Thereupon we are occupying them. Flip side to the Palestinians, guys, Israel's not going away. Sorry, not going to happen. You can talk about driving people into the ocean all you want. You need to sit the fuck down and get used to the fact that you are going to have to learn to live with Israel. And yes, that means that if you get a deal, we see you, and I will admit that the PA, the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, has made some good moves on this. But equally, you have got to treat someone firing a rocket at Israel when you get peace just as seriously as you would treat someone firing a rocket at one of your own people. And no, because if you can't control them, if you seriously say, well, we can't control the people doing this, then we're never going to recognize you because part of being a nation is to have control over your own territory. You know, we don't let people launch rockets at Mexico. You know, we don't let people go over, you know, because they will get their asses slung in prison. But both sides really, you know, I'm getting quite frustrated with both sides. And you know, this is just what would normally not even be an issue went up to the Supreme Court because of this ridiculous never-ending.
Yeah, but I mean, that's
problem.
really the thing is you've got all these people, and let's be really honest, this is not a political problem. This is a religious problem. There is nothing political about any of this. It is a whole bunch of people talking to imaginary people in the sky who are going, I have to kill that group of people over there, or that group of people over there has to do something so that my imaginary friend can come back.
Right, and this is one thing I always get upset when people say Israel was founded 2,000 years ago. No. A group of people with a similar ethnicity and religion occupied a land 2,000 years ago. They were then displaced from that land, spent the next 2,000 years wandering. The people coming back to Jerusalem had very little ethnic, linguistic, and for that matter, even religious commonalities with the people who had been forced into the diaspora after the Second Rebellion. Because, 2,000 years is a long time, and God did not give you the land. I mean, again, we gotta say that because one of the more pernicious ideas is the idea that we must have these lands, and you get this from the illegal settlers all the time because God gave us this land. No.
Well,
God
we need to just get over this whole God idea in the first place. There is no fucking God to give you anything. Grow the fuck up, all of you.
Yeah, because, seriously, what gave you the land, if you want to worship a god, stick a Sherman tank in the front, in front of it, because that's what gave you the land. There was no fire from the sky, and, to be honest, this didn't actually happen until fairly recently. I mean, it wasn't until the 80s that you started really getting a lot more of that. Before then, it was more of a minority thing. Flip side, let's face it, when the Israelis were willing to talk, and up until about the 70s, late 70s, I would say they are, because they were sure as hell willing to give land back after the 73 war in return for a peace treaty with Egypt. But they were willing to talk, and of course, so many Arabs were screaming, no, we're going to drive you in the sea because this is our land, it was given to us, etc., etc., etc. And nobody was willing to talk. I mean, probably one of the biggest tragedies of this entire issue is usually when one side is willing to talk, the other side is sticking its fingers in its ears and screaming, la, 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 I can't hear you. And we have yet to be at a point where seriously both sides are willing to talk, because it's going to take a lot of sacrifice.
Yeah, but it's not just both sides. It's us. We are the biggest problem in all this. Yes, the people in Israel are assholes. The Palestinians are assholes. The Muslims are assholes. But who the fuck is funneling all the money into Israel? Us. Why? Because we're fucking religious dumb shits.
And that was something that honestly did not happen until the late 70s with the third great awakening, as some people call it, the rise of the moral majority, which was never moral or a majority. But, before then, the U.S. was much more ambivalent about Israel. I mean, we weren't even really Israel's biggest fans until the Cold War really got rolling on. I mean, in 1952, during the Suez Crisis, it was the U.S. that basically looked at Israel, France, and Britain and said, no, and then literally just told them they were going to cut that out. They were going to cut that out right now. And, Israel, France, and Britain kind of got really scared and left because the U.S. was truly the big dog on the block at that point. But yeah, I mean, we need to understand that it is a religious issue, but it should not be America in there making it worse. And yeah, you got the people screaming that, Israel must exist for great Cthulhu to rise. Literally, there are people who support Israel for the sole reason that the Jews are going to all die, and that's going to kick off the end times. Which is, and if I was an Israeli citizen, I tell friends of mine in Israel, you got to understand, some of these people are not simply do not like you, but they are actually quite anti-Semitic. Israel is important to them because of how they see it working out in prophecy. It is not important to them.
Yeah, but let's be really honest. Most of the people in Israel couldn't care less. They're all going, hey, believe whatever the hell you want as long as the money keeps rolling in.
Well, and as long as they get the support. Of course, I point out to them that, religions can change their causes awful fast. Do you really want to tie yourself to a bunch of people that may realize that, wow, the apocalypse hasn't happened? I know why. It's because Israel's still around. We misinterpreted the text. Tying yourself to a religion, especially, religions like these ones, can be quite dangerous because you never know what they're going to say. Granted, it can be amusing because, in Jerusalem, they commonly have, people kind of freak out. And I was reading the memoirs of one Israeli police officer that mentioned the worst day of his life when they got two Mary Magdalenes that they were carrying off to the happy farm, and they got into an argument over who the right one was. But really seriously, I think Jerusalem would work best as an international city. You can just take it off the table, because if you take it off the table, nobody can get the Benny point saying,
I think it would work best as a nuclear Holocaust ground. I think places like Jerusalem and Mecca and a few other select cities that have just turned into religious war zones where they've just become so important to religions. I think the best thing we could do is just nuke them into the ground and let them glow for a couple thousand years so that all these religions can go, hey, guess what? Where's your fucking God now, asshole?
As a historian, I have to say that would lose a lot of stuff. A lot of neat stuff. But, of course, granted, if we go to Mecca, it's getting torn apart already. The Saudis are basically tearing every damn thing down to build giant, high-rises around it. One reason why Iran doesn't like Saudi Arabia is because it turns out that mostly, like 6th century mausoleums getting torn down for a Holiday Inn. But yeah, I personally think that, cases like this are going to remain dicey because it's really not about the 12-year-old. And it wasn't even so much about the president's right. It was about trying to be able to claim America says this and getting America into this fundamental religious question. And, I'm happy the Supreme Court said, nope, the president doesn't have to dive into that particular mess on your say-so.
All right. Well, then we should probably get to the main event.
This is the main event.
Ah, yes. People of America, beware, for soon you shall be forced to abide by French law. Well, maybe. France is seeking right now to extend Google's right to be forgotten across the world to all of its search engines. Now, a little background. Last year, the European Court of Justice said that people have the right to ask Google to delist information. It's called the right to be forgotten, which is a right to say that, maybe you should have the ability to take down those pictures the time that you decided to send scans of your butt to all your best friends on Facebook. Obviously, there is no way to do this in general with the internet. So what the argument was is that Google will delist the information. In other words, if I want to go to Charles Gray's greatest butt dialing incidents, and I get that delisted because now I'm Charles Gray professor, and that kind of makes me look stupid, what will happen is if you type in it, it won't come up on the Google search results. And Google said, okay, and we'll have a synopsis process. They've processed about 1 million at this point. And now, however, what's happening is that the CNIL, the French authority, is saying that, well, wait a minute. Okay, that works if I'm on Google.fr. What if I'm on Google.com? You can still get Charles Gray's greatest butt dialing incidents. That's unjust. And what Google is saying, well, wait a minute. Google France is the French search engine. What you're now asking us to do is to essentially extend your right to control our operations across the entire damn planet. Needless to say, that is a bad thing. We have to understand today that some of the defenders say, well, the information's still out there. And I say it doesn't matter because in today's internet, if you don't have a search engine, you're not going to find it. The search engines are so integral to the operation of the internet that essentially if a search engine black holes something, it's gone. And this is why, by the way, Google threatening to delist a company is always considered such a bad deal because it can destroy your business. But what France wants now is for Google to be forced to do that all over the world. This is a terrible, terrible, terrible thing for two reasons. First of all, what France's idea is on what should be forgotten and everybody else's ideas may be different. Like, for instance, if I find out that a person was charged with multiple counts of corruption, that might be interesting if I'm talking about voting for him. For another thing, France law doesn't apply to me. Really, probably the big central part is here is France is wanting to have the de facto effect of making their law apply to me, which is not the case.
Right.
And what's going to happen? It's hard to say because this is a case where, well, first of all, Europe has always had a hard-on for Google. They really hate Google. France hates Google. They have taken dozens of different measures against Google. They do not like the fact that Google is so dominant in the market. And to be blunt, guys, it's because Google's good. This isn't a case of somebody who's achieved a dominant market position, but they're a really crappy product. Google is the best search engine out there for a reason. Equally, the problem is that this is such a dangerous precedent in that obviously it starts to allow you to force other laws, impose other laws on a company. Now, you, me, people listening to this, we're never going to hear France come about us directly. That's not what the threat is. The threat is that we can suddenly find our companies, because they have an electronic presence, even if the company itself is based in America, being forced to comply with other countries' regulations. I mean, just to use it as an example, what if China someday decides, okay, well, people in China, even through the Great Firewall, which is what they erected rather than let Google have unrestricted access, what if they say at some point, okay, we don't want you to be able to Google Tiananmen Square. So we're going to start fining any company we want to take legal action even though it's not based in China. What happens if we already had a case where Britain was trying to impose their liability acts on the people, which actually brought a law passed in America saying no, you can't. But fundamentally, this goes against one of the really core attributes of modern nationalism, which is that a state's jurisdiction stops at its borders.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm not even so worried about that. Because let's be really honest. All right, how far can this really go? Can I insist that Google Maps forgets my address? I mean, what if I just don't want any information about my life recorded online? If you look at a recent satellite map, hey, there's some cars I drive. You can tell what cars I'm driving. I demand to be forgotten. But what about criminals? Can they decide they want all online records of their crimes forgotten?
Well, the argument is that Google evaluates your request. But yes, there have been some cases where they said, okay, this guy was found guilty 10 years ago, and you have to delist the results. The problem is, of course, is that you can also make an argument, yes, the guy was found guilty of theft 10 years ago. Normally that wouldn't be a problem. Right now, however, I'm considering to hire him to handle the finances at my multi-million-dollar company. And you run into the question of, okay, who decides this? How do you decide this? And to my mind, you run into the other problem is that maybe it would be better just to start understanding that this information is out there. Maybe you need to be a little bit more careful on the one hand, and on the other hand, maybe people looking at things need to understand that everybody has done stuff. We live in a glass house. Let's not be overly judgmental.
What happens when politicians go, hey, I just demand any bad press that I've ever had in my life goes away and be completely unsearchable? What then?
Actually, I believe that happened. I think there was one politician who was, let's see, politicians with scandals have been using it, and former criminals have been using it, which is a problem, because if you are a politician, you better accept the fact that shit you say is going to stick around. Now, they've asked for these removals. I don't know, and unfortunately, I don't think there's any information out there saying how many removals were granted, because Google has refused a fair number of removals. But of course, if they keep getting sued, then you run into the question, okay, how long will it be before Google says, all right, screw it, we're just going to approve every request? But equally, that hurts Google, because Google can't afford to be known as, we're the greatest search engine in the world, except when someone doesn't want us to be.
I'd just like Google just tell France to go pound sand and refuse to even acknowledge France. Just delete google.fr. Just say, hey, we are no longer doing anything within your borders. Fuck you up the ass. I think France needs Google a hell of a lot more than Google needs France.
It might come, there is always a possibility where that might happen, because obviously if the precedent gets set, I mean, the precedent here, even if France never requires very many, that just the idea that Google's servers in America could be vulnerable to this is a very serious precedent that I don't think Google can allow to be set. And, in some respects, I will have to admit, this is a problem that America also has. I mean, if you look at, for instance, America is one of the only countries on the planet that says our tax law applies to American citizens in other countries. Most other countries figure if you're living in Great Britain, you're paying British taxes, and they're the ones who are taking care of you when your house burns down, so no big deal. The U.S. has done a lot of bullying of other countries, saying if any financial transaction ever passes, even electronically through American territory, we can regulate it. So to be honest, this is a trend that America needs to get rid of too. And France is just doing it, France is getting yelled at mainly because it's such an obvious, it impacts everybody. I mean, even most search engines that are, quote, not Google, use Google. There's a lot of search engines out there that whatever they put on the search engine, they're actually, are in a arrangement with Google to make use of Google results. So, it's a terrible decision. It may see Google leaving France. It may ultimately, in the worst case, start to see an ever more divided internet.
But I don't see how Google is going to pay the slightest bit of attention to anything France has to say. They're not based in France. They have no real business interest in France. I'm sure they don't make much money out of France. So what is France going to do if Google just thumbs their nose at them and says, sayonara assholes?
Theoretically, this could be a Europe of all, and Google is trying to make inroads into the European market. They're the dominant search engine. I think the next biggest is Bing, and we all know how wonderful Bing is. Please don't sue me, Bing. I just don't like you personally. But, it would hurt Google. I'm just thinking that it probably would not hurt Google as much to allow this to be, to allow this precedent to be set. Because, seriously, if Google does do this, it's not just France. Seriously, it's not just France. It's opening the ground for every other damn country on the planet to start demanding that Google make changes to their search results. And yes, Google can say yes, Google can say no. If Liechtenstein decides that they may pull out, but it really harms the utility of the search engine as a search engine.
The other big thing is, I don't really know what kind of power France has in this, or any country for that matter. The U.S. probably has a lot more power than anybody else because most of the internet runs through the U.S. But
right, the backbone.
Let's be really honest. If these countries say, we don't like what you're doing, how can they actually force anything to change? Because all the information that is coming from their countries are running through countries outside of their control. And Google can just go, well, hell, I got the information from over here. Fuck you.
Yeah, the other, the fact of the matter is that they can find Google has subsidiaries in France. They could try to sue Google, whether or not that would be respected by American crime. You might see a similar thing that occurred with, British libel laws. Congress might pass a law saying that any lawsuit brought against Google on things like this or any lawsuit of this nature is considered non-binding in America. In other words, no American court will act to enforce it. At that point, all you have to do is keep your money out of France. The other alternative might be, and this is something that businesses in Canada often do when it comes to abiding by the American Cuba embargo, is just price in the fines. Because, recently, Google was fined 150,000 euros. Now for you or me, 150,000 of anything is a lot of money unless it's Zimbabwe dollars. But the fact of the matter is that Google probably paid for that by cutting down the after dinner breath mint from 2 breath mints to 1 breath mint at their campus. A lot of times companies will honestly just say, okay, we're not going to obey your law. The nation goes, we're going to sue you. And then, at that point, they say, here's some petty cash. And then at that point, obviously, it's up to the nation in question. Do we just keep doing this so we can say we're suing them? They can say they're not abiding by us and everybody goes away happy. Or do we actually start upping the amount of fine to the point where it really begins to hurt? It is entirely possible that France may simply decide to stick with a fine that they know is that Google's just going to figure, okay, well, we don't pay sales tax in France. We'll just stick it under sales tax. And then everybody's happy. Google doesn't have to change. France can say they haven't backed down and things go on much as before. That really depends. Seriously, one of the other arguments here is that, again, there's a lot of hostility to Google among certain European and French agencies.
Well, screw them.
Well, yeah, so if you start seeing increases and, if you start seeing increasing regulation that people know Google really doesn't want to partake in, it could run into the problem of them actually being, accused of trying to drive Google out of business via regulation. And that could see something happen with the WTO. But as of this point, I think this is not going to happen, that nothing's going to happen here because Google cannot afford to let this precedent get set.
You would think so, but let's face it, companies have done stupider things in the past.
Companies have done stupider things, but usually not stuff that impacts their bottom line quite so dramatically. I mean, let's face it, Google is dominant because they have been very, very smart when it comes to handling things like this. But it's going to be an interesting thing to keep looking at because we'll probably know how serious people are going to be in probably about the next year or so. These things grind slowly. There'll be a lot of behind-the-scenes discussion and conversation that, I would bet you that between the two of them, Google and France will probably keep more secure than the United States nuclear launch codes. And then we'll find out what happens after that. Because there's also a factor, I think, honestly, both sides have certain reasons to want this to be resolved in a way that's acceptable to everybody. Google has business reasons. If things go sufficiently badly and France doesn't back down, it'd be a major slap in the face if the USA passed a law saying you can't enforce this judgment in America. Or if they went, or someone went to other ways of retaliating. So I think that we're going to see a lot of behind the scenes discussion trying to resolve this thing.
I really don't see where France has any power to enforce anything. I mean, if Google just said, screw France, we're out of here, all the people who live in France, A, they're going to be pissed off that they can't reach Google, or they just log on to other servers outside the country and still get their own thing.
Right.
And nothing ever really changes.
And of course, if Google's not operating in France, Google could always say, well, we're just not going to list any French companies. And I know a lot of companies that one of the first things they do when looking for someone to do business with is hit Google. And that's another factor. If Google is forced to leave France, it will probably have an immediate and negative impact on the French economy.
Right. And plus the fact that, let's be honest, even if Google leaves and they're all going, well, that's okay, we can just use Bing. Well, what's going to stop France from turning around and pulling the same crap on Bing? And Bing is going, hey, we're out of here too.
Well, and this is a point that some people have been arguing is that Google this is why a lot of people feel this has more to do with European and French hostility to Google, because Google is the one that's always getting this. Other search engines have the same thing. Google is the one that's getting hit with these fines and rules. So the question now is that are they really targeting Google? Because, France has always had an issue all the way back to the wars over Coca-Cola. France has always occasionally had a little issue and been really prickly about American dominance in these areas.
Well, then maybe France should get off its fat, stupid surrender monkey ass and do something for themselves.
Well, and it'll be interesting to see what happens. I mean, because there is a tremendous amount of litigation right now happening from Europe aimed at America. EU has launched an antitrust inquiry into Amazon. I mean, this is going to be a real problem because if you look at a lot of these companies, a lot of people are trying to say, well, they're monopolies. No, they're not a monopoly, not really in the legal sense. You're just really damn successful. There are other alternatives out there.
Yeah, in order to be a monopoly, you have to go out and find other competing companies and shut them down or swallow them up such that nobody else can start another company. Anybody can start another Amazon or another Google or another whatever. But you have to compete and actually be successful and do better than the existing companies in order to take market share. The fact that you aren't even trying or that you can't do that, that's not a monopoly, you dumbass.
Yeah, and it's always been a hostility. And this is another reason I think Google will not have to back down on this, because seriously, a lot of American tech companies are watching this. And that's a lot of money. I mean, American tech companies are really, really powerful now. I expect to see that if it comes down to a fight, Congress is going to have Google's back on this.
Well, they pretty much have to, but let's be honest. American tech companies are powerful because American tech companies have earned the power.
Successful.
They've earned it. They haven't stolen it. They haven't bought it. They haven't done anything. They haven't broken the law. They haven't violated anybody's rights. They've gone out. They've been successful on their own, under their own hard work. That's how capitalism works. And all these other countries over there who really have piss all, they've done nothing. They've got nothing. And then they're all sitting around going, well, we're just jealous because we don't have that. Well, get off your ass and work for it, dudes.
Well, and then also there's the fact that Europe, I mean, unfortunately I've had to deal with this with Europeans several times. They point out, well, we don't have the same First Amendment we do. We consider right of privacy more important than right of free speech.
Well, that's your damn problem, dude. That's your problem.
I just have one thing to say. Wrong. Because seriously, they always talk about, how we have terrible people coming around here and, Nazis. I say, yes, and yet America has survived. In fact, it was not America that became, that found one of its member nations turning into a fascistic dictatorship. Not just one. I mean, Spain, Greece, America, the right of free speech has been one of the fundamental barriers to these negative, political movements. But the right of privacy, while increasingly important, I will admit that the right of privacy is important. It should never be co-equal to the right of free speech. Because the one is a personal right, the other one actually acts to protect the state and protect society. And, we're gradually finding ways because, seriously, I think that the biggest protection for privacy will be what I'll term the asshole rule. Eventually, people who look into other people's garbage and find something they did are going to find people looking at them like they're jerks. It hasn't happened now because it's still really, really new. I mean, Facebook's been around since 2004.
Something like that.
Yeah, something like that. We're talking transformations in our society that have been around for less than a decade. Or just over a decade. And it's going to take time to get to that. But I think that the, defending the right of privacy, the right to be forgotten, is going to, in the long run, be proven to be the incorrect way to go about it. Which doesn't change the fact, no, France, you don't get to tell me what I see on my Google.
Yep, that's absolutely true.
Even if I want to type Charles Gray's greatest butt dial.
And nobody, trust me, nobody wants to do that.
We can say that would be a case where the punishment would fit the crime. So, anything?
No, I think we're pretty much done for the week. You got anything left?
No, and next week we will have more interesting stuff. I'm not certain what, but the world always seems to deliver with both stupidity and interest.
All right. Well, thanks for hanging out with us. We really appreciate it. Please do all the usual things and spread the word. And remember, we'll be back next week with more religious and political craziness. The world's an insane place, but it can be made better if we all work together rationally. So until next time, take care. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Bitchspot Report podcast. We invite listeners to interact with the show by commenting on our website at report.jdragononline.com. We can also be found on most social media sites, including Facebook, Google+, Tumblr, and Twitter. You can also listen on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, and Player FM, as well as on the aforementioned website. New episodes post every Friday at 9 a.m. Pacific. Those interested in being on the air, please visit our website. All instructions are there. We appreciate our listeners and supporters. We couldn't do this without you.